So whenever you want to start,
Okay.
I just want to I just want to say. I mean, Anna will give a sort of an official introduction, but I want to steal my usual 3 minutes at the beginning. So I think I'll start by saying that I'm very happy to have Chris here today because I mean. Again, I mean, I have white hair, so I am allowed to talk about history, and Chris and casting, they have been part of the RobotCab project since 2003 when we were writing the proposal, and so I mean, their participation at that time was sort of a pioneer participation. I mean, they were mostly involved in modeling, the development of social interaction, and that was one of the core of the RobotCab. The RobotCab project, development and cognition, and at that time, the group of Chris and Kerstin were involved. At least it was for the first time that I was exposed with a group interested in using robots to study social interaction in children, in let's say normally developing and autistic children. It was really at that time, I think, pioneer work. So I was very happy that they were interested in using also the iCub and see how the iCub can help also in this kind of application. Now there is a lot of effort and a lot of activities going around, but at that time I have to say that the group at Hertfordshire was really one of the pioneers. So we discussed with Chris and casting. We had very long discussions during the meeting of the RobotCab project, and David is here also. It can be, he can. I'm sure he still remembers how fun it was to discuss about cognition at that time. Anyway, so this was, let's say, the historic part. Now, Chris is in Canada and is still, of course, is still working on cognition, and that's end my historic part. I leave to Anna the burden of introducing properly Chris.
It's the same conversation as yesterday for the people that were there. You introduced perfectly your speaker. So you leave to me to say, yes, Professor Nehaniv is the co-founder of the Adaptive Systems Research Group at the University of Hertfordshire, together with Kerstin. So while my original, let's say, story in robotics started with Kerstin's work on the Aurora project as the first thing that drew me to human-robot interaction. I'm also following the work that they have together with Chrystopher. So it's my very, very big pleasure to introduce him. Professor Sandini gave a wonderful introduction on their research. So with that, I would just perhaps start already the meeting and invite Chrystopher to give us his talk, starting from experience, developmental and active cognitive robotics. I will mute all of actually, I will ask you to mute yourselves and remove briefly the option to unmute during the talk. If at any point during the presentation you want to interrupt or ask questions, you can use the raise hand option. I will be tracking the chat. And then at the end of the talk, we can have a Q&A session where you can ask also directly. Okay, thank you very much. Chrystopher, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Anna and Julio, so much. And it's great to see so many old friends and newer friends online here in our transatlantic seminar. I'm not sure how many continents we have, but at least 2. So this is entitled Starting from Experience, Developmental Enactive Cognitive Robotics. And now we, together with Kerstin Dautenhanna, we founded the Social and Intelligent Robotics Research Lab here at the University of Waterloo in 2018. And I have some indication of the support we had from different funding agencies, including infrastructure grants from the Canada Foundation for Innovation, Ontario Research Fund, which helped us obtain lots of infrastructure to build up the new lab, but also for previous work going back to Cogniron, even before the RobotCub project. So I really like the iCog logo because it has a kind of interactive flavor with the second person. Well, even the original one did with the robot and the human holding hands. But that's one of the themes for today. So just to, let's see, show some of the robots at the previous lab at University of Hertfordshire, where Frank Furster is now the one running the iCub Dici. You can see the various robots we had there. You'll see some of them in my presentation. Because I have also white hair, I can talk about some history, and some of these ideas and videos are from previous projects, quite old, but I think they still show some things and some aspects of cognition and experience that are underplayed in today's artificial intelligence studies. So here at our new lab, we also have a group already with more than 20 members, and various robots, including self-built robots and 3D printed and so on, for studying human-robot interaction and the development of intelligence, particular social intelligence and cognition. And finally, we have, since this year, right, the Canadian iCub has arrived. So we're very pleased about that. And this week, a course is running with graduate students learning how to operate the iCub, although many of them have been doing it in lockdown previously with simulators. And we've even conducted some studies online with simulators. Oh, I better turn off the notifications from the mail here. Okay. So in our lab, we adopt this agent-based perspective. So we consider that agents, so it's very much, I'm focusing on experience. So we focus from the viewpoint of the agent. The agents have their behavior repertoire, internal states, representations. So this is a bad word in the enactive approach. It's a word we try to get we try to do as little as possible with representations. Ideally, nothing requires representation if we want to understand cognition starting bottom up. That's deep philosophical theme that runs through the enactive approach, and I'll talk about that. Maybe you'll be surprised of some of the things I'll talk about, because I want to get down to the perspective of an agent from its own sensory motor experience of the world. Okay, and this will include biological organisms down to cells, but also through humans and other forms of life, plants, animals, and so on. Mainly we focus on animal cognition and have a viewpoint of evolutionary continuity between ourselves and other animals. And I'd like to just mention to emphasize experience, it is the organism itself with its receptors, nervous centers, movement of the organs. This is from Merleau-Ponty, which chooses the stimuli to which it is sensitive. The environment comes out of the world with the actualization of the organism's essence. Okay, so this is focusing on the experience of the organism, and it's very important that it is selecting how to interact with the world. Okay, so it's not just blown around by the environment, or you could look at it that way, but there are the two sides of the environment's influence on it and its influence on the environment, and how they structure each other. This is called sometimes structural coupling in the enactive approach. And I'm going back to the book that set in motion the enactive approach, The Embodied Mind, in 1991, where there's a certain tension in science, or sometimes ignoring one aspect of this, that bodies that we have are physical structures, but they're also lived experiential structures. They have this biological and also phenomenological aspect. But these two sides are not opposed to each other. We have both. although we often ignore the phenomenological or the experiential. So we want to understand this, or this was the motivation of Varela, Thompson, and Roche at Berkeley when she with them wrote this, this seminal book, that we have to actually consider the relation between these two aspects. So we want to create a bridge between the mind and science and the mind and experience, so between cognitive science and human experience. This was the goal that they set out for themselves in this book, and they've succeeded in making this a very influential direction for understanding, say, philosophy of mind and cognition, right? But a key viewpoint here is that all of our understanding involves our own experience, even if we're trying to conduct third-person investigations of some phenomena in science. We can ignore that, but we're missing a lot if we do, and if we're trying to understand cognition, you'll be making a big mistake. So the active paradigm has experience and interaction is central, where the dynamics of interaction can cut across boundaries that you might impose that as an observer on the system. The histories of sensory motor and social interaction are important. Phenomena are never regarded as static, but they're interdependently originated processes. The activity of the agent creates and shapes the world. And a key phrase here is that the organism lays down a path in walking. So while it's living, it's developing and carrying on its sensory motor activity. Okay, so I see I'm going to be probably way over time, but hopefully I have some time. I'll have to skip some of the material. So in robotics and AI, we have this behavior-based approach that came around slightly before that book with Rodney Brooks's layered architecture, subsumption architecture, where he proposed to achieve intelligence in AI systems without representation. These systems, like your Roomba, right, they have this immediate temporal horizon, at least in their original form, where they just react like, if you know Breitenberg vehicles, in a simple way to their environment by some sensory motor couplings. They don't learn anything. But can we, so my theme here is, can we actually extend experientially this, the temporal horizon of agents? And some methods to do this are to bring in affect, which can affect emotion-like phenomena that can modulate action selection over a small time horizon, but also a broader temporal information or episodic information at the narrative or autobiographic remembering level. And it doesn't, this does not have to be in language in any way. And if it's in language, we want that language to be arising bottom up and not programmed into a system, because cognition can't be hand coded, right? We have to have, if we want to have development of cognitive robotics, robots that grow up, this has to become an autonomous activity of the agent. Okay, so the slogan of Matran and Varela is all knowing is doing, and all doing is knowings. It's a relation between experience and action. So we want to reach beyond these kind of reactive architectures to have agents that enact and scaffold their own sensory motor development and open-ended cognitive abilities, and with a broader temporal horizon based on first-person experience. But I also want to emphasize very much second-person experience, so the intersubjective relations with other agents. Okay. And then cognitive structures are going to then be constructed and emerge over time in this kind of context. Right. So we have a timeline. This is not yet a very good figure from past to future, where the now is the kind of reactive subsumption approach. We can bring in affect to get a little bit more of a temporal horizon into the agent's activity. And that can also be used for learning and prospection. Then at wider temporal horizons, we can use autobiographic remembering, or even planning, prospection of some kind of, with a larger extent. But that's from a first person point of view, the agent's own point of view. Second person point of view, the interaction partner, there's social signaling at an immediate level, empathic, what we'll call empathic resonance, social learning, which involves imitation and scaffolding of skills, and biographic reconstruction, so understanding the other agent's history and how it got there. And so I won't talk about much about third person because that's overemphasized in Western science and engineering. You already know about that. Okay. Oops. So let's go. Oops. I'll go here. So I'm going to go back to another idea of Varela, who wrote about autopoiesis, and this is a word coined from the Greek meaning self-production, and this is intended as a characterization of life. This is a simplified version than compared to their original formulation he and Maturana developed. It's characterized this way: the system built its own boundaries. This construction is due to reactions or activity taking place within the system, sometimes at the boundary, and it's performed through reactions determined by the system itself. Okay, so this is intended as a characterization of living things, which is going to be connected to cognition, because the cognitive things we know are living. Right. So this was they proposed a simple computational model in 1974, published in Biosystems, where they illustrated you can achieve this in a cellular-like structure where boundary is created. Inside the boundary, reactions are facilitated, or the concentrations are such that the boundary is reconstructed and repaired, even though its components are maybe decaying and changing away. Okay, so it's a kind of computational model of autopoiesis, and there have been further ones of these. They moved far away from wanting to abstract so much from nature, but what's going on here is that the individual self is distinguished from the environment by this kind of process, and this individual self is emerging through the process, continually constructed, reconstructed, so you get self-maintenance, self-repair, and self-production. There's not necessarily any reproduction. That's something that could occur in this context, right? And you can think of the boundary not as a topological enclosure, but as an interface with the environment. It regulates the in and outflow of information, materials, waste, possibly offspring, giving birth, propagules, through which this interface is there, and it's by means of this interface that this individual self is maintained, and the conditions and network of interactions for this recursive continuity of the process are produced. And for Maturana and Varela, this is the minimal requirement for life and cognition. Okay, here's a picture from Pierluigi Luisi of this kind of picture. So you have a bounded system where input and output, and these could be physical or informational or other kinds, is generating the network that's producing the components and maintaining the organization that determines that boundary, and so on. And this is and it continues. And so it's a process. This is a process and not a static object, right? So if we consider life this way, life is an emergent property, an ongoing process of self-production of recursive processes constituting components in their network of relations. And the momentary structure is dynamically changing like a wave. A wave is not the individual water molecules, right, that are in a particular location. So life is producing itself against this background of the environment. Again, Luisi also illustrates that as the organism is creating the environment from the environment its own world by how it interacts with it, and that can be viewed as cognition or enacting sensory motor activity that's meaningful for that living entity, or well, we can debate if it's living. So this is what we can call this Chilean Maturana Varela Santiago theory, that life is interaction with the environment of this kind of autopoietic system, and that is its activity is cognition. Okay, but if you look at very simple systems, biochemists have actually built simple systems which satisfy these properties of autopoiesis, and even exhibit reproduction, so there'll be more of them. So at the boundary of this phospholipid bilayer, more materials can be added. If some are damaged or lost, it will repair itself due to preferential reactions due to its presence. And so you get this kind of satisfaction of the requirements of autopoiesis. And even if there's, depending on the rate and of influx of the components, and the environment, you can get either decay of the entire system or it becoming unstable and splitting into multiple individuals that satisfy this type of cognition. So you have this kind of reproduction of these autopoietic vesicles. But, and this has gone on in synthetic biology. People have tried to put in genetic material and achieve this in various different ways, but you might not want to call these things alive. So we can ask Varela, Thompson, and Ross ask in the embodied mind these questions. What is cognition? How does it work? And when do we know that the cognitive system is functioning adequately? And they answer it very differently from the representationalist, cognitive computationalist paradigm or the connectionist paradigm. They contrast their answers with that. So their work is also goes back to this, again, the viewpoint of the experience of the animal that comes from J.J. von Uexküll, an Estonian biologist and neuroscientist. Some people call him a biosemioticist, where he insisted that we look at living things or the animal from its own sensory motor embodiment in the world as not a mechanism, but as a subject, an experiencer of the world that is not a machine, but is operating a machine, if you like. Okay, so that so the experiential world of animals such as this one is very different from our own, and we can only understand its activity and cognition if we actually look and see what's the terms that are translated as sensorium or motorium in its activity in the world, what's important for it. Okay, so in the enactive view, the following are emerge as the important principles, so that cognition is perceptually guided or involves perceptually guided action, and cognitive structures emerge through sensory motor activity, recurrent patterns that enable perception.
Hey, did we have a drop in the connection?
Yeah, I just went out and it came back.
Yeah, I think it stopped for a moment.
Do you see the slides anymore, or are they gone?
Right now they're gone. Can you try to share?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No worries. I wasn't sure if it was from my end.
At least it came back right away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think this, you can see it now,
Okay,
yeah?
perfect, yes.
Okay, so these are the answers that they give in describing the enactive view. I think you need to read this book because it's, if you come from a typical science and engineering background, for people working in robotics, these considerations are far from obvious. Okay. Another related area is sensory motor theory. So this is due to Kevin O'Regan and Alva Noe. And they emphasize that experiences have a phenomenal character that they do due to the particularities of the sensory motor patterns, in particular in different sensory modalities. So O'Regan asks, why doesn't red sound like a bell? And this is part of the answer is given by the sensory motor experiences that we have in their particular patterning. So the answer that Varela, Thompson, Ross give to the questions is here. So cognition is in action, a history of structural coupling that brings forth a world of experience, and it works through a network consisting of multiple levels of interconnected sensory motor networks. And we know it's functioning properly when this entity becomes part of an ongoing existing world, like the young of species, the young of every species do, or it shapes a new one, as happens in evolution. Okay, but as people who build things, constructive biologists, if you like, or artificial life researchers, AI researchers, we can try to implement this this vision of cognition. Okay, and you might say, well, you know, your technology is not really alive and not autopoietic, so why bother? So let's have a little consideration about that comes from Michel Bitbot and again Luisi. So the viewpoint of Matra and Varela is that in cells or in neuroscience and in development, internal structural change and organizational stability are balanced with each other. And if a system enters into cognitive interaction, its internal state is changed in a manner that's relative for its maintenance. It enters a new interaction without loss of identity. However, there can be more drastic changes in structure or in organizational principles. Okay, and coevolutionary adaptations require change, alternations of both in the environment and organization of that autopoietic unit while allowing it to persist. And so what Bitbolt and Luisi do is they look at that the kind of minimal cognition or minimal autopoiesis, and they try to extend it by bringing in ideas from Piaget, in particular assimilation and accommodation. So assimilation is like continuing your activity, more of the same. Say you learn to ride a bicycle and then you learn to ride it better through more experience. Accommodation would be something like a drastic reorganization. So you've moved from a bicycle to a unicycle, where you have to drastically change how you operate. Not all your experience will transfer. And we have similar considerations that if you look at cellular level, the cell adjusting its genetic expression, say E. coli facultatively metabolizing lactose if it's present, and so on. That's a kind of adaptive behavior that goes beyond simple reactivity. So they distinguish 4 levels of cognition. So autopoiesis just without any active assimilation or accommodation, these self-reproducing micelles, that's not sufficient. They say this is not sufficient for life. So this is a kind of null level of cognition. Then there's also passive or active assimilation, discriminating selection of inputs, and so on, sensing and acting to preserve viability. This would be autopoietic minimal life. And then accommodation would involve also organizational change, adaptation, enduring change and transformation that preserves the entity, or at least the identity of the lineage. It might actually change. And then even higher levels, we have complex accommodative changes that evoke representation like descriptions to describe their behavior from an observer perspective. And then cognition 4, intersubjective knowledge, predictive rules. And so we can imagine all kinds of cognitive capabilities that would be at these higher levels where humans like to locate themselves. Competing with that, there are other descriptions of autopoiesis and cognition. So for Bourgine and Stewart, they say that cognition requires the following. You have interactions of this unit with the environment, these interactions, so the inputs and specific outputs, should promote the viability of the system by modifying the environment. So that's what they call cognition. But notice that this allows cognition for non-autopoietic systems such as robots. But then here, what does the viability mean? Because the robots aren't alive. It means viable from an evaluation perspective of the observer, right? Of us as a designer of the system. So we have then these kind of 3 views of cognitive systems. The original Maturana Varela, that life, autopoiesis, and cognition come together. The Bitbolt and Luisi, where autopoiesis is required for life and cognition, but you can have autopoiesis in simple systems that have no cognition, or Bourgine and Stewart, that these are overlapping. Life describes systems that are autopoietic and cognitive, right? But you could have cognition without autopoiesis, and that's maybe not sufficiently described. Maybe these other levels of cognition are useful here for us in building systems that develop and adapt. So life, according to them, life requires both cognition and autopoiesis, but we can already talk about cognitive systems and even systems that develop and have assimilation, accommodation, these higher capabilities, even if they're allopoietic, if they don't produce themselves. Okay. So maybe we can jump to some actually built systems that are built. And I have here, so upper left is Varela, and to the right is Wittgenstein. The middle is Michael Tomasello, who have this influence on our work. So we're going to take a constructive approach to experience as a temporally extended flow through an agent's sensory, motor, and internal variables under perceptually guided action, enacting cognition. This is a kind of view, and we will even be able to use methods from information theory. And the meaning of information for us arises as its use in context that should be viable, say in the sense of, from an observer perspective at least. And that's very much in line with Wittgenstein's thinking. So playing the interaction game, playing the language game is the criterion, and you don't need to have propositional representations of what's going on. For that, in fact, you should be able to explain where these propositional representations that somebody else has come from using these kind of approaches. So a criteria for success is that we have to have evidently felicitous engagement in interaction games or language games with others in the environment, evoking observer attributions of representation like behavior, even if we don't have an autopoietic system. Okay, so this is a kind of review of things I've already mentioned, so let's move ahead. Right, so just to mention about the in active systems with, they are bringing forth this boundary distinction, but it's also, you can think of it as an interface or a fold in the environment where they are regulating their interactions and creating that environment. Okay, so now with the iCub, we can have the same slogan, Wanderer, the road is your footsteps, nothing else. You lay down a path in walking. So how can we do this? Oh, just to mention here quickly, because these are important aspects of considering experience, there are two developments from enactivism, radical enactivism, that basic minds do not require propositional, truth functional, or representational contact. Those must emerge and not be presupposed if you want to understand cognition. You could have them, but they're not required at the basic level. For example, Dan Hutto and Eric Mayen have articulated that. And also radical neural phenomenology in neuroscience, that there's this fundamental circularity where experience has to always be taken into account, including that of the scientist or observer, who's in fact always a participant. And Varela has introduced this approach. He's also a neuroscientist as well as a biologist and many other things, mathematically active as well, in this wonderful paper, Not One, Not Two. And for a very recent discussion of this, I recommend the article by Elena Antonova and Michel Bitbolt about this topic. Okay. So what we'd like to do is have self-structuring of perceptual fields. Well, from an information theoretic point of view, we can bring this in and achieve various levels of learning, which look like they require representation. I mentioned the first and second person already, and emphasized first person experience of the agent or the animal or the robot. A second person is about intersubjective experience, or having interaction partners. And we have increasing the temporal horizon from purely reactive to bringing in affect. Okay, and we can say what affect is, maybe adding learning as well as more temporally extended experience, which might be autobiography or biography in the sense of experience of the self or other agents. Again, not necessarily anything to do with language. So in the second person aspects, how can we make sense of others, other individuals or selves? This involves social interaction, and for human development and lots of animal development, learning from experience of others is a form of second person interaction and information. They're very important immediate issues of synchronization, coordination, alignment, empathy, or understanding the other as another individual, as another self or experiencing entity. Storytelling, again, not symbolic, and then language games from Wittgenstein. These are all second person types of information. And this has been there since Luca, the last universal common ancestor at least, so the first cellular life, more than 3 billion years ago in microbial mats propagating by budding or cell division, immediately living things were in the environment with others, right? So many, presumably well, if it's Luca, they were cells, were in contact with each other, and they constitute each other environmental and sensory motor experience from the beginning. Okay, so many aspects here that arose already that time, for us living things descended from these guys. Sensory motor, biochemical responses, rhythms, signaling, sex, mating, interspecies interaction, all of these occurred, reading the other living interaction partner. Later on with social learning and imitation, there's this correspondence problem, learning from others' experience. And these concepts of empathy and biographic reconstruction that I just want to mention here, that are these are concepts due to Kerstin Dautenhahn. This is based on a hypothesis that complex forms of social understanding that biological agents, especially humans, show are based on two mechanisms: bodily experiential dynamics of what we might call empathic resonance, where we recognize the other and the other recognizes us. Okay, very common in animals, they recognize each other this way and in our immediate interaction, but also biographic reconstruction of a communication situation. For example, where you might get on a bus and somebody runs in, heavily breathing, sits next to you, okay, and is very, very loud and sweaty. Well, you don't worry about that because you reconstruct their story, you reconstruct their biography. They must have been in a hurry, barely made it to the bus, ran there, and then that explains their state. So you understand the other through in this temporally extended way. So here are some creatures that are interacting with each other. At a very immediate level for achieving things like signaling, threat, camouflage, displaying different patterns towards different interaction partners simultaneously, and so on, with a very different Umwelt, which we won't go into. But this notion of intersubjectivity, or experience of the second person, which you can take as the second person's experience, but also your experience of the second person, leads to two fields: social robotics and human-robot interaction. And then some key areas of research are here for those areas. Okay, and this goes, so this field of social robotics was established in the 90s, middle 90s or early 90s by Kerstin Dautenhahn. Here she is with Odd Biard and some robots that are engaging in this way, and actually also learning to communicate by imitation, even despite having different embodiments. Other people then started to work in social robotics as well. I can mention Yanis Demiris, and who developed at that time already mirror neuron-like architecture, hammer cognitive architecture, as well as Brian Scazzolati, Cynthia Briazel, who looked at these issues of interaction and signaling, things like gaze and so on. So the second person interaction is the basis of all these areas as well: imitation, social learning, and culture. And there are a plethora of mechanisms that come in to this matching behavior, learning from others, interacting with others. For example, a stimulus enhancement, which doesn't necessarily involve any kind of direct teaching or copying, but only discovery of the affordance of a milk bottle that was observed in birds in Britain, spreading through the population. Okay. So imitation is one of the areas of social robotics and human-robot interaction that we study, where we have different definitions of imitation: learning to see an act from seeing it done, or the one below of Mitchell: something is produced by an organism or machine which is produced similar to something else. Registration of the model, and registration of this model is necessary for the production of C, this copy, and C is designed to be similar to M. So there are many definitions and various big questions around imitation and learning socially in interaction. This is sort of one area of second person information. But there are different questions about what does it mean to match the behavior of another. okay, in learning language or learning a skill, for example. Is it matching movements or combinations? Are you matching goals, states, and effects? What does that matching mean? And we even see interspecies solutions. If you've Lewis Herman in Hawaii studied dolphins and observed them imitating humans in various ways, where they would map, say, their flipper, their tail, depending on the situation, to the arms or legs of a human, the head to the head, okay, despite having a very different embodiment. And then, so solving this kind of correspondence problem doesn't have a unique solution, but depending on the situation, depending on the species, different solutions or none might be found. So this is something we formulated in 2001, how to use your own effectors to match either the states, actions or effects that another agent is carrying out, and creating this kind of mapping between them. So this is difficult because you might require this kind of mapping, but maybe you really need the mirror mapping in order to carry something out. But again, what aspects are you interested in? And if the robot is imitating you or learning socially from you, where should it map its effectors? How should it map those with your effectors? Okay, and there are corresponding effects also have multiple interpretations. If you're demonstrating this to a robot, that this dotted block is moved to the right, in this other context, what happens? What should be done? Should you match the relative position, the absolute position, or the relative displacement? So there are many correspondence problems. And one of our former students and now an academic, I think in Sweden, Aristelis Andrakis, developed an architecture for this, ALICE, action learning for imitation via correspondences between embodiments. And this uses mechanisms using various metrics for states, actions, and effects across different embodiments. And he also demonstrated transmissions of behavior and a kind of cultural variation and transmission in simple robots in simulation and physical ones using that. We won't go into that. Other types of social learning involve scaffolding, where often a parent will provide an environment where the young can experience aspects of a task that allow it to learn. So a mother cheetah will release prey that are small enough for a young cheetah to capture, or chimps will that use tools will scaffold the environment by providing the objects necessary to carry out some tasks, such as opening fruits. And also this has been observed, actually shaping of the hands in chimps that learned some sign language, molding and putting through experientially the forming of signs used in communication to teach sign language. So these various kinds of scaffolding provided inspiration for an architecture for robot learning, hierarchical skills and capabilities due to Joe Saunders. I will show you at least one video. I hope that well, this is a system using this architecture and showing the importance of contingency in the interaction with the robot eliciting tutor behavior. Well, we hypothesized that the robot eliciting tutoring behavior from a participant will scaffold learning if it is acting appropriately in terms of its social signaling with the interaction partner. So teaching something to Dici, which was the iCub in Hertfordshire, if the robot detects that the participant is gazing, so the human is teaching the robot about some objects, what they're called, what they're like, and speaking about them, the robot is learning words by associating its experiences with what it's perceiving in its sensory motor realm at that time. But if it behaves by gazing where the participant is gazing, or if it behaves by gazing at the object and in this kind of socially contingent way, the character of the interaction is very different. Let me just jump ahead to video here.
Hello. So this is green here, and you can see the cross in the middle. Yes. And on this side, this is green also. And
Okay, that's the first 25 seconds. So it's going there.
hello.
Under the tutor is gazing at the object, and the robot then gazes at the object at the beginning. Okay, we can do a kind of ethnomethodological analysis about who's looking where. The teacher gazes at the object, the robot gazes, detects that, and the teacher's gazing at the object, then the robot gazes at the object. The robot teacher sees that the robot gazes at the object. The tutor reacts by using different elements of social interaction, like greeting and laughter.
So this is green here.
And begins to instruct. The robot is looking where she's pointing. Okay, and establishes joint gaze with her, mutual gaze. Gives an affective signal, smiling.
Here, and you can see the cross in the middle. Yes. And on this side.
Okay, she's pointing at the object. The robot points at the object. Okay, and you can see what her. We can look at what her language is like there. So she speaks in short sentences, simple repetitive syntax like subject, predicate, object, with a final rising pitch contour and pauses in between. Okay, and so the presentation is oriented towards the robot, and it actually enables the robot to contribute and produce responsive conduct. Okay, but in contrast, if the robot doesn't behave in the socially contingent manner, but say withdraws its gaze, a different participant.
Okay, so we've got a cube here in front of us, and it's got 6 sides, all with the same dimensions. So first we'll look at the top of the cube. So this is a square pasted onto the cube, which is blue in the outer square. We then have a smaller square in the middle, which is white.
Okay, so you can, there's quite some differences in the interaction here. Let's see, go here. So the robot is, the participant is looking elsewhere after a while. The robot is not necessarily looking where she's looking, not necessarily pointing at the object or responding to pointing or establishing mutual gaze. So in its behavior and engaging with the second person in this non-contingent way, what happens with the syntax of the teacher? She's also, if you saw, looking down. She has fewer and shorter pauses, more complex syntax with relative clauses. Very hard if you're just learning how to, your first words. Tutor's not really gazing at the robot as much. It's more difficult for the robot to understand and discriminate what's happening, and limits robot feedback. Okay, so and that wasn't just for the case of these 2 participants, but was a general phenomenon that without appropriate contingent socially responsive behavior, learning was much less successful. The interaction was less successful as a scaffold for learning, for the robot being able to use those words that were being taught about, like here, the moon, the square, the color blue, and so on. This is recent work here at University of Waterloo, where we compared the effect of different kinesics of motion and gaze on human teachers' perception of the robot's perceived confidence, and eagerness to learn, and so on. And we saw significant effects of factors such as whether the arm movements were smooth, fast, slow, hesitant, jerky, or smooth, and whether the gaze was always at the teacher or always at the task, and can give some kind of recommendations about designing interactions that would facilitate the robot signaling its level of confidence, or whether the teacher should perhaps speed up. So because we're designing artifacts, we have to build some of these things in. Am I stuck here? Oh, okay. Right, so maybe we're running out of time. So we have this idea of meaningful information at various temporal scales, and first, second, and third person aspects. So meaningful information in the first person. So I'm not saying meaning, I'm just saying information that's meaningful. Right? And that's going to depend on the first person, that agent itself. It's information that's in, and I'm talking also about Shannon information in sensor, actuator, and internal channels of the agents that can be either within the agent, between agents, or between the agent and environment. And these should be useful, at least relevant statistically, in a statistical sense, for satisfying its homeostatic or autopoietic goals, so viability in the sense of Bourgeon and Stewart, or other drives, needs, goals, and intentions. For example, working towards obtaining positive reinforcers and avoiding negative reinforcers, which is a role of, affect plays a role there in us and giving us a broader temporal horizon. So again, we're inspired by Wittgenstein to consider the meaning of language or words as not given by propositions and logic. That those things need to be explained. Where do they come from? But it's this meaning is defined via the use of these words in language games or in habitual forms of life. Or we can call them interaction games. And so we extend beyond just language and talk about, in general, signaling and interaction between agents. We can talk about interaction games where there's this structural coupling with others in the environment and sensory motor in action, and look towards achieving this kind of third or fourth level cognitive developmental accommodation to new organizations in that interaction. Okay, so we can have also second person aspects of meaningful information at various temporal scales, recognition that that's an interaction partner, that it's somehow similar to ourselves, with maybe projection or attributions of meaningful action to the other in the present now, like with empathy or with autobiographic reconstruction. As well as learning from experience from others. So there's various kinds of information that are involved there. And different areas to investigate, which again, episodic information isn't necessarily linguistic. Okay, this is one of the peripersonal space salience detection systems from the iCub project, RobotCub project. Things have developed since then with the work of Francesco Ria and others to allow similar orienting and attention for salient events in the peripersonal space around the robot. I'll just jump ahead towards some, let's see, very low on time. Right, so here the viewpoint is that it experiences temporally extended flow over sensory, motor, and internal variables, so it's now operationally defined that way. It's not necessarily phenomenologically experienced, but this is the approach to modeling or using these robots as a platform for cognitive systems research to actually implement this from the viewpoint of the agent, experience of the agent itself. Something else from the RobotCub project. So immediate sensory motor information, you regard your sensors and actuators as information sources in the Shannon sense. You can impose a metric on those, the Crutchfield-Renyi metric on information sources, and use that to organize your experience into what is similar to what informationally, what's related to what, and then you get a geometry. So here's a kind of homunculus or ibunculus observing for the iCub with that kind of method. So this is using this metric of the sum of the conditional information. So it's like the joint information minus mutual information. Then we have here a Shannon, Renyi, and Crutchfield that allow us to bring these kind of methods in to studying the experience in this way, or harnessing these methods. And we're not saying that this is what is necessarily happening inside living things. Other things are happening that are perhaps in some way analogous, like Hebbian learning or spike time dependent plasticity and so on, which reflect organization and sensory motor relations. This is the same? I think this is with and without visual sensors, the information sources and within that robot. You see its jaw and its visual field over here organizing themselves this way in a kind of cortex-like map. And this is one of the messages of the enactive approach, is that perception develops only if it guides action. So we have this classic experiment with kittens, where kittens which were not, which were perceiving the environment or experiencing visual signals, but not interacting with that environment, fail to develop perception. If they couldn't guide their action, they fell down, they couldn't act properly. Here's an analog of that in a striped environment where vision organizes into columns, but then if the robot is released into a more usual office environment, it then can recover from that and develop a visual organization which reflects a more usual, two-dimensional retinal structure. So just, you can see it's kind of trying to become there it is. Okay, and that so connecting that with experience, if you think of the work of Paul Bachi-Rita, he showed that you can use, say for blind people, sensory substitution by projecting from a camera a tactile image onto their skin. Later development was projecting it onto someone's tongue, and so although the person can't see, because they're if they're moving around in that world or guiding action using that that sensory interface with the world, it becomes an experience of sight. It becomes an experience of navigating through the world. Okay, so this is the importance of perception must be connected with action in order to develop, and then it's a kind of cognitive activity. Okay, I'll skip this one. This is just showing the same thing, the kind of the organization of a visual field based on initially random going to informationally structured relations. Okay, these are all at the level of immediate or short time window experience. Okay, and from that you can extract a visual flow and know the effect of actions on what you will perceive. Work with Lars Olsen. This also was in the RobotCub project. So creating these sensory topic maps and then act to produce desired experiences. And so looking further to how we can apply this towards acquiring more complex skills. Well, those are very complex already, interacting with the environment, and those can be taken much further. We can view language as a motor activity for manipulating the world. It's not just communicating, but getting things done. It's not just representing information, but influencing others, social grooming, and so on. Okay. So a lesson here for AI from Wittgenstein, I think, is that success criteria for language would be playing the language game, which would mean felicitous interaction games or other games beyond language, other kinds of interaction with the social and sensory motor environment. So engaging with the world, engaging with second persons and the other partners in a way that they accept, that the agent becomes part of this ongoing world. Okay. So one important aspect of bringing in a larger temporal horizon is to introduce affect. So emotion-like phenomena, and in experimental psychology, what are these things? Well, for us, there are certain reinforcing stimuli, which we will work to, we and other animals will do instrumental work to obtain them or avoid them, right? They're positive or negative reinforcers. And then we can use that response that we have from those we can use that stimulus and our response to it to modulate our behavior, to arbitrate between different choices of action. So this gives a method of behavior arbitration or behavior selection, but also signals for learning. So I won't go through, you can't go through this obviously, but these are for human beings, a bunch of primary and negative reinforcers identified by Edmund Rolls. Okay, and then from a more kind of cognitive appraisal point of view, we can also characterize different events and have our valence reactions to them and characterize those as different emotions. And we can learn the associations between stimuli and reinforcing stimuli. And we can classify then, say, our different types of emotions into whether there's a positive or negative reinforcer. Has it been, is it present? So if it's positive, you can have various positive valenced emotions, or negative emotions if it's negative, a negative reinforcer. But if it's omitted, or if it's terminated, you have a different emotional response. So that's what we see here on this horizontal line. A positive stimulus here is sorry, this must be a negative one is terminated. This is relief, or negative one is omitted. That's relief. And then if you have a positive stimulus being omitted or terminated, that might result in rage, anger, frustration, and so on. So we can understand our emotions in a kind of common currency where we have valence reactions with a degree and use that for expressing, well, for controlling our behavior, but also for learning. Okay, various people have brought in affect into computing and robotics. I won't go into that, including some things we've done with bringing in that as a very essential ingredient for achieving linguistic negation, Frank Furster's work. Roz Klein identified 3 aspects for affective agents. They should recognize affect in others, express affect, or three aspects to implement an AI or computational systems that use affect, and also use affect in one's own cognition, which, as I said, could involve learning. Going further on the temporal scale more broadly, we have the idea of autobiographic agents as embodied agents that dynamically reconstruct their individual history or autobiography during their lifetime. And we as humans interpret interactions that way. I've already spoken about these 2 mechanisms, empathic should be resonance, and temporally extended biographical reconstruction as the second person aspects of that. So we can also have the same considerations as we do for in affect. We can use we can use our own autobiographical information, our previous experience, and reconstruct it in order to select what to do in the world, how to act. We can also listen to or reconstruct the story of another agent's biography, understand its history, and we can also express our story to other agents, or our temporally extended history. And this was the foundation. So these ideas were the foundation for various computational memory architectures we developed with Wang-Ching Ho at University of Hertfordshire to allow something like a Rodney Brooks subsumption architecture to be augmented by episodic information, actions that the agent has taken, autobiographic information. Okay, what were the joint angles? How were they changed? Things like this. Nothing linguistic, and what resources were met, and so on. And allows agents, say, to when they needed certain resources to unwind, to redo those in reverse order and locate that resource. And also these could be, if these were communicated between agents, we showed that these sharing of autobiographies or stories resulted in the synthesis of sort of new memories that nobody actually ever had, no agent in the system actually ever had, but they were useful for the agents in their environments. This was not robotics, but virtual robotics. But this could be, would be nice to do in embodied hardware robots as well. So again, we have this picture of the temporal horizon going from reactive agents that have maybe just taxis and drives to affective agents that can make use of emotion, these kind of reinforcing signals to modulate their behavior, coupling that with learning, coupling that with second person methods for imitation social learning, such as solving the correspondence problem, and then broader temporal horizon that takes into account autobiography and biography of temporally extended experience. Okay, and there's this paper that surveys these different, this kind of dimension of first person and second person, and then here, then in the center, the now, and then different mechanisms that can be used in various aspects of cognitive architectures to encode that kind of information. It's hard to say the word encode, but we use information in a Shannon sense. I don't mean it's representational. So some architectures based on this more extended experience for robot ontogeny were developed also in the RobotCub project and beyond in iTalk. We'll just jump through here, where you have this geometric metric space sensory motor experience, not momentary sensory motor experience, but over a temporal window. And then if you have two, so these should say all the sensors of the sensors and actuators of the robot, and maybe some internal ones, you have a time horizon, and you can compare that to an experience at a different time and get an information distance between those. And these horizons can be different. So that gives a geometry on experience for the agent in which it can navigate. It's a metric space, satisfies a triangle inequality, and so on. Okay, we can judge whether experiences are close to each other or not. So this was work of Asif Mirza. And then we can judge the quality of those experiences by some kind of reinforcement signal based on interaction or affect, and then use that to choose new actions and select actions, sometimes at random, and then build up the cognitive repertoire, the sensory motor activity of the agent in interacting with the world. So this was done for achieving a peekaboo, acquisition of peekaboo behavior with, here's Casper, where the robot is babbling essentially, but through interaction, seeing a face, hearing a voice is rewarding. It learns to engage in this kind of turn-taking interaction. This was transferred then to the iCub here. Okay, so this is this interaction history architecture, and actions are being selected based on information comparisons. So initially the robot is acting randomly, but then selecting sequences of random actions that aren't eliciting any kind of reward from the human interaction partner. The robot finds voice and seeing a face rewarding, and it's signaling back with smiling if it's in a experiencing a positive reinforcer. Okay. So this was a high reward state, and then the robot re-engages in a similar situation, re-engages with the same actions, which may or may not elicit the same response in terms of reward. Okay, so it's learned actually a chain sequence here, chaining from one to another by selecting these different primitive actions, engaging in a repeated peekaboo behavior with Asif Mirza, Dr. Mirza here. But if this is no longer being responded to, okay, that behavior can be forgotten or abandoned. So there's a bit of a positive response. The behavior still being repeated, but after some time, encouragement isn't given anymore. No interaction. So the robot tries new things. Doesn't look happy. So that's a simple example of learning through this temporally extended experience. So these are different areas of research and key concepts for human-robot interaction involving these kind of second-person interactions. With that, the architecture you just saw there, and the previous one, which didn't take into account temporally extended experience, the previous one we had these cortex-like sensory motor maps discovering sensory fields with cross-modal integrations analogous to superior colliculus in mammals, I guess optic tectum in birds. We have raw first-person experiences, and here in the next one we saw a growing space of experiences and behaviors being acquired and forgotten, merged, some experience, various other things which I won't be able to talk about. We saw prospection in the system, so the robot would be able to know what's coming next, sometimes actually in reverse order when it based on its extended temporal experience. Okay. Right, so social development is, as I've emphasized, very important throughout the history of life, and certainly in human child development, going back to primary intersubjectivity, where infants learn their own bodies, and they become persons. They enter the world and engage with a form of life that we humans do through interacting with others. And we would like to have robots develop and learn in a similar way, using social drives as our reinforcers for valence responses. I'll just go ahead. And so we can take these as some second-person reinforcers: visual attention, contingency, coordination, reciprocity, the presence of another person. So this all have to do with an interaction partner. Just go ahead here. Right. Dr. Frank Braz extended this temporally extended interaction history architecture with some short-term memory to keep better track of social engagement. So this was the original one, but we can also keep track of social engagement as a reinforcer with the various different components related to turn-taking components, and using sensors of this type, the robot can detect whether the level of engagement at different temporal scales, whether reciprocity is going on, are we playing the game? So this was important in this extended interaction history architecture, which was released, I think, on the RobotCub website 2.0, and then use that as well towards acquiring different behaviors and switching between them. So there's this paper has finally come out. Sometimes if you say the word inactive, people attack you immediately. Okay, and so this is a paper documenting some of that work with this extended interaction history architecture from the end, actually towards the end of the RobotCub project, where we have these human voice and face are reinforcers. Human visual attention is a positive reinforcer. So turn-taking or regular interaction is also a reinforcer. And then the robot is also expressing affective state to engage contingently with the interaction partner. Okay, and then in this from the experience, a bit. Okay, so here's an interaction where this is double speed. So gaze is withheld here, and the robot is just trying anything in order to be positively reinforced, but based on its previous experience, what worked before maybe is not working. It starts engaging in a turn-taking peekaboo behavior. Okay, it's acquired a drumming behavior and a peekaboo behavior. If the human is ignoring the drumming, it tries something else. The robot initiates peekaboo turn-taking, and she's engaging. This is Katice Kuze. Yeah. The human stops playing and ignores the robot. perseverates on the peekaboo. She's not really engaging. It's then switching its behavior. Okay. So this was the first demonstration of the acquisition of different learned interactive behaviors and then switching between them based on social interaction, which our reviewers were very happy with, actually. And you can plug in,
Chrystopher, sorry. Sorry for interrupting, but we will have roughly around 12, 13 minutes left in the meeting. So okay. Perhaps if you can wrap up in a couple of minutes so that we have time also for the Q&A session.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Right. So I will wrap up in like 10 minutes or 5 minutes.
So the meeting needs to end at 30 minutes past the hour. I suppose
okay.
I can extend it. It's just that I don't know if people have other meetings afterwards. So
okay. I'll try to wrap it up. Thanks.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So we're talking about learning language as a goal. So language actually is a motor activity, a kind of perceptually guided action we engage in. So we can apply this kind of thinking to learning how to use language as well. There are many open problems in language still. Compositionality is emergence of syntactic category there's been some progress, but no progress or very little progress in some of these other areas, like the emergence of negation, predication. So I'll just jump ahead. Again, there's some inspiration from Wittgenstein and Ruth Garrett Millikan on information that does not separate what to do from what is the case, what she calls push me, pull you representations. Okay, I wouldn't necessarily want to call them representations. And this, so this, for language learning, we first used this architecture for social learning through scaffolding called ROSM, which is Robot Self-Imitation and Scaffolding Utility Mechanism, developed by Joe Saunders in our previous lab, also with Aries Ellis-Andrakis. And this draws an analogy between scaffolded skills and scaffolded language. That was him. Okay, so I've talked about shaping and putting agents through by scaffolding the environment. And it's a kind of hierarchical learning architecture where you can learn sequences, goal-directed tasks, or behaviors, which can be hierarchical collections of those things. World state or robot environment state can trigger different kinds of tasks. It's based on idiomotor theory that we make a distinction between our body and the rest of the world because we can voluntarily control and affect our perception of our body through our actions. It's a sort of cartoon version of an extended version of that relates that to social learning and imitation due to Wolfgang Prinz. So if you can achieve an action by thinking about it, then the same action could be invoked by seeing it performed by someone else. And so we can use that to trigger behaviors and to structure learning. You get an architecture like this, which is partially inspired by mirror neurons and also Yanis Demiris's hammer architecture, which preceded this. Okay, and here it is being used by kind of naive participant training a robot with behaviors. It's got obstacle avoidance behavior, but she's actually teaching it to move away from light. Here it's learned to put away trash or cylinders, but if you have a copper wire around the cylinder, it learns to modify that behavior to put that one in a different container. Here, this other, a very different robot has learned to track and follow something. Okay, so these are not waypoints or anything, but it's learned to try to go towards a particular stimulus, and then when it's close enough to reach towards it. Here, Casper humanoid is put through seeing an object and then reaching for it. So you see Dr. Kenley Coy behind the robot. It directs its gaze and its arm towards the target object, but so then it's now learned to do that itself. The object doesn't have to be in the same position. So here it's initializing first, and then it sees, so Casper sees the object in a second here. Okay, even though it's not in the same position necessarily, and then reaches for it. So by this is kind of scaffolding by putting an agent through, or kinesthetic teaching, and that can be used to require these hierarchical behaviors. So let me try to finish up with language. Using that architecture as a basis, and the concept of using linguistic behavior is action, right? Is sensory motor action. We won't go through this this part here. This is babbling, and the robot. Maybe just a second. Oops.
A green arrow. Green, good, well done. That's a word. So this arrow is green.
Okay. So that's just learning the kind of phonetic shape of words and repeating words that the robot is hearing. We can also extract salient information from speech, loudness, duration, pitch. If you look at motherese, the way parents speak to children, and there are particular emphasis on very salient words. And so we can say a word is salient if it's got a higher pitch, a longer duration, and an energy higher than the average in the sentence. And there's also a preference for utterance final word. So the action of producing that word can be one of the actions the robot takes in a similar sensory motor situation. So using that, we were able to get felicitous use of language. Okay, there's no semantics here. There's no mapping, and there's no between meanings, words and meanings. It's just the experience of the robot is allowing it to utter appropriate words in appropriate context, and also with two words. Unfortunately, I think this one is not playing the sound. But here the robot is saying things like green cube, green side, and so on. So you have what looks like topic, comment, or simple predication. And then we've got extending that work. Frank Furster extended that work to try to study the emergence of negation. So there's almost no negation in speech unless you bring in some affect to the robot. The robot displays that it doesn't like something, has valence reactions towards objects, that it likes something. Then you actually have people saying no, and the robot learning to say no in a similar context.
No, you don't like them. If you don't like the circles, why do you keep going on about them? So, yeah, those are the circles. You see those there? No, you don't like the circles. No. Just shaking your head. Okay.
Okay, maybe
what about the moon, the crescent there? No, you don't like that one. Circles, it's not a circle. No, you don't like it, but it's not a circle. It's a crescent, that. Or a moon, if you'd rather. No, it's not a circle. I can tell you that. It's not circles. Don't argue with me, DG. That's a moon, that is. No, it's not circles. No, trying to be argumentative, DG. No, it's not circles.
I think we haven't looked at this one yet. This is the moon. No, you are not allowed to touch it. No, I'm sorry, you are allowed to look at it. No, DG. Just look at the moon. This is the crescent moon. No. Try to memorize the name. That looks so sad. Okay, I will show you something else. This is your favorite. Yes, the heart. You are smiling again. And you are allowed to touch this. Yes. You can hold it. Very good, very clever. Very good. So.
Okay, so by bringing in valence responses to objects and disliking or liking something and showing that, the interaction partners were using negation, and the robot acquires similar use of negation here. So I'll stop. We've shown various different kinds of things that could be done by taking this approach, starting from experience in organizing sensory motor activity at different temporal scales and first and second person. So this is Frank Pfister. I think he's here, who did the work on acquiring negation, and is I think recruiting PhD students at the moment, still in human robot interaction and enactive cognition. Okay. So sorry for going over. I'll stop there.
Yeah, we are kind of going over. I mean, if you want to have a minute to wrap up, okay, but otherwise I think we can open also the Q&A session. Chrystopher, do you have anything else to add, or are we opening the floor for questions?
Oh, I thought you were waiting for questions. Yeah, I'm happy to open it up.
Okay, perfect.
You can just see the summary of the topics here. Switching behaviors that have been acquired in development, acquisition of linguistic competencies that are grounded in one and two word stages, negation, and this kind of message, engaging in forms of life as the development of cognitive activity based on experience. So that's my wrap up.
Thank you very much. So participants can now unmute themselves. So if you want to go ahead, I mean, if we have a lot waiting, you can also use the raise hand so that we form a queue, but otherwise go ahead and feel free to unmute and ask your question. Okay, Adam, you can go. I think you should be able to unmute. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, perfect. A very interesting talk. Thank you. I have just a question about the last words on the last slide, because you mentioned that they are naive participants. What's the baseline actually you tell them when you introduce them to an iCub and you let them teach it?
Yeah, so they are people in the university, not in the lab. And they, for example, people who work in, students or work in the cafeteria, and they're asked to teach the robot about these objects as if they're talking to a child, as if they're teaching a child. So we did kind of want to encourage the use of mother ease. And if we had I think there was one participant Frank told me about that, tried to teach the robot in the most efficient way according to the participant's idea. So eventually we had to exclude that one because it was so different from everybody else. So they haven't been told in this last experiment that it's about negation. And in the previous experiments, which successfully showed the grounded acquisition of use of words, one and two word phrases, so not phrases, but triggering one word and then another word, either by inhibiting that word that's just been uttered, or taking into account word order. We did various kinds of experiments, also compared with grammar induction techniques. But so in those experiments, without the affective component, the valence response of the robot, the iCub to objects, people almost never used negation. Right? But as soon as they saw the robot wanting something, rejecting something, rejecting certain objects, or frowning and trying to avoid them, even they started to say no, and then the robot acquired it. So it shows the importance of having communicating your own valence response as an agent if you want to acquire language, and in particular negation.
Do you use any questionnaires after the experiment to just test what the humans were actually thinking about the robot?
So debriefing. I think Frank Pfister is I don't know if he's still here.
I am.
Yeah, Frank. That's a good
Hi,
question.
Frank.
I think a great question for you. So Frank actually carried out this work as part of his PhD and beyond.
So yes, I mean, I did do questionnaires, but I actually never analyzed them, unfortunately. I mean, there's also this issue that if you have what participants kind of rationalize after the experiment is not necessarily, you know, the same thing as what they actually did. So, I mean, I did do the questionnaires, but I think much more useful is actually if you analyze the actual interaction on the videos. So there's still analysis that could or should be done with the video recordings. For example, something like conversation analysis, where you drill much deeper into the participants' own kind of construction or construct of what they think they were doing. But so that hasn't been done yet. So we kind of used a whole number of analytical methods, but yeah, the really kind of most effortful one, conversation analysis, we haven't unfortunately used yet. But yeah, and maybe a short answer to the question what the word naive means. That means mainly that participants were not aware that this experiment was about negation. So they basically thought they were just teaching the robot these object labels. Which was true. I mean, that's also what they did, but it was not basically what the experiment was designed to do. So they were kind of what psychologists would call it was a single blind experiment. So I was aware what participants were meant or in which group they were, but they didn't know about the kind of true purpose, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we also, I mean, the previous experiments that weren't about negation, we also had so-called naive participants. By that, we just meant they didn't have a background in AI or robotics or cognition. They were just people around the university, mainly students, often computer science students, but not working in this area, not working in linguistics.
I have a follow-up to this last question and also to what Frank mentioned. So analyzing the interaction between the participants and the robot by analyzing the videos. So I'm assuming that means having an external person that would come in and actually annotate the videos and analyze them. And I think that ties in with what you were talking, I think roughly in the first third perhaps of your talk, Chrystopher, from Bitball's work and about autopoiesis and cognition and how they correlate. There was the sentence of what makes a system or an interaction viable from an external perspective. So what would then be the requirements, let's say, for this kind of interaction to be viable? What defines a viable interaction?
Yeah, okay, so this is about language. So it's about sort of engaging in the form of life where the participant is and the robot is using the words in such a way that they appear, that it appears the robot is using them referentially, this kind of linguistic behavior, although it doesn't, you know, it's not, it doesn't have a grammar, it doesn't have a semantics, it doesn't assign truth values to propositions or any of that. Actually in the negation work, there was a painstaking analysis of the kinds of negation that were occurring that was carried out. Okay, I think with Frank Forster and Kinga Groff, two coders, were classifying the types of negation from what they appear to be in interaction. So that requires knowledge of linguistics and kind of the pragmatics of negation types. And Frank had to develop a taxonomy for negation, extending the existing ones in developmental psychology for that. And then there was a rating on how felicitous, or the use of negation was in different settings. Okay, so maybe I gave an example, an impression that everything was very successful, but there are of course examples where the robot said something and it didn't make sense to the participants. But generally with the kind of two-word learning or the grounded word learning experiments, the participants interacted with the robot, say once a week over a course of 5 sessions, and it learned the grounded use of those words in that time, and it followed a different. So because you have a robot, you don't have to use the same experience for every participant. It's not learning and generalizing its knowledge between participants. We could have a separate developmental trajectory for every interaction partner. So each person came in, and if they had called a particular object a star or a moon, somebody else maybe called it a smile, and the robot would learn their word for it, and it would also speak that word when it interacted with them. Okay, and also because we worked at a kind of low phonetic level, it often also learned the way they pronounced it, even if it wasn't the way that I or you might pronounce it. It learned the pronunciation of that person. So there's a lot of things hidden under the hood in terms of phonetic processing here, and transcriptions that occurred. Actually, the learning that was going on between sessions rather than during sessions, because we had to do a lot of annotation and analysis in order for to associate the utterances with particular words, and there was some phonetic processing, all these kind of issues. This would be much faster these days, although a lot of the language, natural language processing systems, they cut you off because you don't have access to that low level of phonetic learning that we have to deal with here.
Thanks. If anyone from the audience has a question, you can also directly unmute or raise your hands, because otherwise I have a lot of questions that I don't want to occupy the whole conversation here by myself. So okay, in the meantime, while participants organize. So if you, in case it's easy, if you can go back to the slides on the 3 different views on life, autopoiesis, and cognition.
Okay.
I want to be very, very, to play the devil's advocate and ask if you're playing favorites and whether there is a view that you prefer.
Well, I really like the viewpoint of Wittbold and Luisi, because so this is one on the left here, where life and cognition require autopoiesis. Yeah. Okay, but until we build autopoietic systems, we cannot hope to have anything cognitive, right, as an artifact. If you take this viewpoint very strictly. But I think we get and if you read the Embodied Mind, they don't actually talk about autopoiesis. They do a little bit in the introduction to the 2nd edition, in particular Eleanor Roche, but it focuses on experience rather than life. Okay, which one is a prerequisite for the other. But I think it's a useful consideration to say, well, from the participant or observer point of view, is what I'm seeing, does that look like cognitive behavior? And that's what this viewpoint of Bourgine and Stewart, well, they're saying, okay, we're enactivists and we're willing to talk about cognition without autopoiesis. Okay, so now I'm in the door with building artificial systems and say, yeah, okay, well, what do you mean by that? You just said something. Their description of cognition actually was the one that's quoted here, is very simple. Interactions of the unit with the environment, inputs from the environment's specific outputs, and the interaction triggers of type A triggers an interaction of type B, which promotes viability. Okay, that doesn't really say very much. If you compare with the Wittbold and Luigi Luisi definition, they distinguish various levels of cognition. What Bourgine and Stewart described is just a very minimal kind of minimal level of cognition for them if it were autopoietic, right? But I think it's very useful to distinguish to bring in these concepts of what is that cognition? Is it developmental? Is there assimilation in the sense of improving the behavioral capacity to deal with certain stimuli and have more experience, kind of building up the same repertoire while maintaining your viability, right? Or are there fundamental restructurings that are happening? Things like suddenly being able to use speech referentially, or to learn to ride a bike. So that's I think that's much more that's much more fleshed out and useful for me. So I think this is, the Maturana and Varela is a good start, but this field is not finished, and I think there are a lot of debates within it and outside it. But I think it's quite a useful viewpoint. So I favor, I like all three very much, but I favor some combination of them where we maybe use this one, but then we bring in here a much more
a more nuanced view of cognition,
or sophisticated, different levels of cognition, and identify those. I think that's more useful.
Thank you. We have Daniel Polanin that wants to ask a question, and then there's also one from the chat that I will read. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hello, thank you.
That slide. We didn't go into empowerment, but that would be the next step if you want to propose it.
Yeah, basically my question is actually linked to what you just talked about, and I felt that you talk about replication and so on. The big question is, what is replicating? So in other words, I think one of the key questions I would like to ask you, what do you think about individuality? How would you characterize it? I remember, and I mentioned that because we had a big problem when I did the work with Andres Burgos. We had a big problem talking about replication, because informationally, what does it mean you have 2 or 3 times the copy of the same thing?
Okay. Well, one thing to mention, first of all, is that from the viewpoint of Varela, autopoiesis does not require replication. You have persistence of the system. It's like a wave. You're maintaining the dynamics. The organization persists. The activity of the system is creating the components which facilitate the persistence of that organization.
Exactly. What is that organization? That's my question.
What is that organization?
What is the individual? The individual.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if I can show the others. I have lots of other slides that I couldn't show. I teach this in a graduate course here in artificial life and embodied intelligence. So I gave this kind of simplified definition of somewhere here of autopoiesis from Varela, and this is already okay. For him, this is an individual, right? It's building its own boundaries and constructing and maintaining this network. Maybe this picture, the picture of.
Yeah, the concept of a boundary is an interesting one.
Yeah,
I think he skirts the question. I don't blame him for that, but
on the other hand, he applies this thinking to the immune system, okay, where the boundary is not a kind of a surface, right? In the immune system, it's you identify self and other or non-self, and try to exclude or deal with, or at least live with, in a kind of incorporated way where they're not too harmful, other aspects. So I think that, yeah, whether a boundary is really required is under debate. I have actually a student in our course who wrote a paper. He did his project on trying to create autopoietic systems without boundaries, comparing them with autocatalytic sets. Maybe I shouldn't talk about it because it might be published, but it's not yet submitted. But this issue of, is a physical boundary really necessary? And that's been brought up by people who have tried to apply the concept of autopoiesis to society and kind of second order cybernetics, Heinz von Förster, and people who have tried to identify, say, corporations or higher level organizations as autopoietic. There was a reaction of Matran and Varela to try to restrict very much away from these more abstract levels and away from any kind of computational realization of autopoiesis, and a kind of strict insistence on a boundary in a cell-like structure or in an organism-like structure. But yeah, it is problematic because when individuals are reproducing, say by propagation, plants are sending off shoots that can become independent individuals or be cut. The question of when is it one and when is it one individual, when is it two, and also if there's sufficient change in the individual, is it still the same individual? I think there are other experts, I think also amongst the audience, about Autopoiesis who know more about Virella's thought on this than I do. But this question of individuality is very important, and we have also, as you know, the emergence of multiple levels of individuality. We consist of the descendants of what were free living cells. Even in our inside our cells are the descendants of previously free living bacteria, like our mitochondria. So you have this kind of symbiogenesis where two individuals have, or two lineages have an intertwined evolutionary fate when one starts to regularly live inside the other or together with the other, things like lichens or our mitochondria. But then we also have higher level individuality where our bodies are multicellular, and there's a kind of division of labor between those different cell types, liver cells, nerve cells, brain cells, skin cells, and so on. And they're not reproductive, right? They may be reproducing, but they're not reproducing at the level of sperm and egg and creating a new multicellular individual. But they are part of a successful enough higher level organization that they're cooperating with this. Let's say, to use the words of Rick Michaud, they're not defecting against the higher level structure. And if they are defecting against the higher level structure, that would mean, as we've discussed, that you have freedom at the lower level where the cell, say, wants to replicate and says, well, the higher level individual be damned, I'm doing really well, I'm reproducing lots of copies of myself, my reproduction rate is optimal. We call that cancer, right? So that's one of the first things that's suppressed in the emergence of multicellularity. So multicellularity is actually emerging all the time on Earth to different degrees, and we have forms of organisms that are going back from being multicellular to being non-multicellular. And we also have congregations of individuals that become a higher level one, like the cellular slime mold, Dictyostelium discoideum, which I think you know about. You have free living amoebae that are consuming bacteria, but when they start to starve, they start dumping cyclic AMP in the environment, signaling to each other, and they swarm together into a clump, and it grows a ball of cells rises on a stem, and this dries out and becomes a means for escape. So it's temporary multicellularity in which there are new emergent sensors that the individual amoebae don't have. It can do phototaxis, thermotaxis, which the individuals don't do, but in their multicellular form. And they're not necessarily related to each other, right? But they're combining to escape a starvation situation by employing multicellularity, and then being able to be dispersed somewhere else. The sporangium is knocked over by the wind or an animal, and then it goes somewhere else, and then the process starts again where you have these free living amoeba. So yeah, the question of what is an individual and how do lineages persist? Why is, from evolutionary sense, why is fitness heritable for multicellular entities? Why is the form heritable? All of this requires explanation. We know more and more about it, but certainly many open problems. I don't know if I answered your primary concern.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's an interesting discussion, and it's a long discussion. I mean, states are a nice example for the difficulty of defining what an individual is. So many times a stable state country behaves like an individual. In times of crisis, it behaves like it has multiple personalities, and it can completely dissociate in the worst case. It does happen. Yeah, so I feel this argument of the multiple levels is probably a good one.
Yeah, so in the state you have multiple agents, multiple organizations that might be have competing interests. One of the points that Virella and Maturana Uribe make in their paper is that this boundary that you see there, you don't have an autopoietic system or an individual if this boundary is put there by you. It has to be actively maintained and produced by the activity of that entity. And these 3 points here are a simple list, but the original paper, although there's some quibbles with it, they make that very clear, that it's not the observer attributing the boundary. It's not only the observer attributing the boundary. The entity actually has to be generating it. So if you have something like a rainbow, it doesn't have a boundary that it's maintaining. It's just we see it, but it's something else. Or if you have the city boundary, that's something that's well, is it maintained by the organization? You can have a debate about that, I guess. But for some entities like a cell, it's very clear. Or even these micelles.
If you have two competing entities, I think the question of maintenance is, I think, ambiguous. If you have two entities or multiple entities that compete with each other.
You mean inside an individual? Or?
Think of colonies, think of states, think of countries. It could be individuals, but I'm thinking more of an extended individual that takes an area, say like a city state or something. And then the boundaries are kind of maintained, but not really. They're a result of a Nash equilibrium between the different competitors. So is it maintained? I feel that that word is a bit open to interpretation. So if what you're talking about is a maintenance where the individual actually maintains it against the competing forces of physics, against basically tendency to lose structure.
Not only that, but okay, actually we have it here on the slide. The boundary, so this boundary is not only maintaining against the sort of the forces of entropy and decay, but it's also establishing a means by which to interact with the environment. You decide what to allow in, what to allow, what needs to go out, and that's regulated. And this for Bitbold and Luisi is like, I think they call it level 1B of cognition, where there's active selection and control. So sensory motor activity is regulated at the boundary, whatever the boundary means, right? And that allows the internal conditions, whatever internal might mean. So it might not be a topological sphere. So that the ongoing activity can produce the components needed by the individual, and that its organization is facilitated within that space. Again, what is it might be a more abstract notion of space than physical space. If you want to go and start using autopoiesis at these other levels, I think it's quite dangerous to do so because we tend to project a lot onto things. And then I've seen, to be frank, nonsensical discussions where people have gone overboard. It's dangerous. And I think because of this, and it's open to criticism, if you depart from the kind of chemical, physical level, that I suppose that Varela maybe was just wanted to stop that discussion and said, no, I mean, chemical cells. And somebody like Gail Fleischaker insisted that we're only talking about cells and living things, and kind of very dogmatically. But I think there is these concepts can be useful beyond that, and there may be forms of organization that in some rigorous sense are producing these boundaries and regulating their interactions in a sensory motor way that are not just observer attributed, or that that multiple observers would agree are doing this by measuring properties of the system, kind of socially shared empirical investigation.
Thank you. I will read out, we have one more question from the chat, and then I think we can wrap up as it's getting quite late for the people on the European side. So the question is from Yuri, and it's, what do you think about the definition of intelligence following Luhmann's systems theory as a property of system that emerges on the basis of self-referential meaningful processing of information?
Okay, so I've heard the name, but I haven't read that that theory in detail. Those concepts sound important, but I can't really comment on it because I'm not familiar enough to give a expert answer.
Okay, well, Yuri, you can also perhaps contact Professor Nehaniv via email if you would like to discuss this more. Okay, so I believe that as it is 6 p.m. here, we can wrap up the event. Thank you, Chrystopher, very, very much. You presented an extraordinary amount of topics, and as soon as the processing of the video is done, we will upload it on YouTube so that people can also go back and check if they missed maybe perhaps some parts. So usually there's also Professor Sandini to wrap up. I don't have anything else to add other than asking you to join me in thanking our speaker. And we are looking forward to having another maybe invited talk from the group at the University of Waterloo. So feel free to volunteer some of the fellow researchers or postdocs to host another iCog event.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for putting up with me. I mentioned I was teaching a course related to these topics, and so I thought I would be prepared for this lecture. Unfortunately, the course had a lot more time than an hour and a half. I had weeks to explain, and I think it's a bit intense if you come across these ideas for the first time. But I encourage people to read The Embodied Mind and start thinking from the viewpoint of experience of the living thing or of the agent. I think the experiential point of view is very valuable and missing in science and engineering to a large extent, especially in AI still.
I agree, and I really like the overall topic of how the second person experience is very crucial. So it's not something that can be added on top of any kind of cognitive framework that people are developing, but it's actually the social dimension is very much crucial and essential for the developmental of cognition. So
it's been there with us from the beginning of life.
Yeah, I would be curious to have also a future event tackling directly on this topic on involving the social dimension in cognitive architectures. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chrystopher. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Participating. Thank you for your questions and attention.
Bye-bye.